Thank you, Gary. I'm delighted to have so many people here, and thank you so much for coming to this presentation. Let me start with a little story. I'm a physicist by training, and I got my first job at Xerox PARC in the 80s, putting transistors on glass. And I learned two really important things about myself and the world then. First of all, I didn't actually enjoy bench work, so that was good to learn early in my career. Second thing was Xerox is quite famous for having fumbled the future, invented things that didn't go anywhere, or at least I didn't capitalize on from a business point of view. And so I think this question, I didn't realize at the time, but this question has really propelled my career forward. What does it take to actually change the world? And the Xerox experience demonstrated to me that a great technology and a clear customer value proposition, while clearly necessary to change the world, isn't actually sufficient. So I've been on a lifelong journey around what's missing and how to help companies actually do something big and impactful. I've had many chapters in my career. My current one is with a company called SmartOrg that I founded in 2000. Our little quip is that we align innovation and finance and help companies drive profitable growth. And in a way, this is the answer to this question of what's missing. There's something about critical thinking about financial and economic issues that is at the heart of what Xerox wasn't able to do. So my company is a capability building company. We provide software and services to help you guys up your game in innovation and portfolio management. But probably what you really need to know most about me is that my favorite food is chocolate, and I hope there are many chocolate lovers also on this webinar. So that's a little bit about me and my company. Let's get some audience interaction. I'm going to use these polls a couple times, so this is also a rehearsal, but just what's your innovation role? Obviously, we can't do introductions for everybody, but if you have a, you can either go to the website there at pollev.com/DavidM470, or a little simpler is you text the line David M470 to the number 22333, and that will enter you into this polling system. And then you just text a letter for what your innovation role is. So we'll give folks a couple minutes to kind of figure this out. And I've identified four roles here. The first one is an innovation executive. So this is like maybe a C-level or perhaps just below that, I suppose. Oversight and accountability to drive growth through innovation somehow. So there could be many different titles here, but that's kind of the role. Innovation leaders typically report to innovation executives, although not necessarily, but they're stewarding innovation resources in a broad area. And their job is to kind of look over many things and make sure that opportunities get identified and matured and developed and so on. Another role is an innovation doer. I mean, these are the critical people that actually get stuff done, whether it's technical work or marketing work or manufacturing work, but they are the wonderful scouts and explorers who go out there and actually get stuff done. So they're typically part of the teams, and of course, the other category. So I see the poll numbers are moving around here as people are figuring this out. So I'll give just another like 30 seconds for you to put in something. It looks like we're about 1/3 innovation executive roles, and well, okay, now it's jumping around some more. I'm going to let this stabilize here for a moment. So the nature of this talk is aimed, I don't know, 80% innovation leaders and 20% of the other two. I guess that doesn't add to 100%, but there we go. There's a sense of the audience. I think you'll find this topic quite interesting. So thank you very much. Let me give you a quick overview, a metaphorical overview of what innovation is about. And innovation is really a couple basic functions. You've got some idea of some new thing, might be something like Internet of Things, or maybe what to do with Cas-CRISPR, or some new market area that you're interested in, how to deal with elder care or something, but you don't really know. It's not in your wheelhouse. So job one, understand the terrain. Job, which is probably different than the terrain you're accustomed to. Job two is to figure out what the big idea is. And there's a kind of challenge in this because this big idea is in fact a kind of fiction. It's not real, but it's a dream and something you would like to make happen. And there are, of course, many forces in organization to be conservative, but what's the big idea is part of this job of an innovator or scout. The next thing is to demonstrate it, show the way. What is the path that we can get there? Is it real or not? Because, of course, this idea started out as somewhat fictional. And once you've demonstrated enough, in a large business, usually you're handing it off to kind of running business units. So you got to stick the handoff and make sure you've answered the questions that they really care about to pick it up. Or if you find something that's outside of a business unit, have a compelling enough case and momentum going that you might actually start a new business unit or deal with it some other way. So that's kind of innovation in a metaphorical sort of way. So let me give you an example of a recent success by my colleague, Ralph Morales, who you can see there in the lower left, who was working at HP and got the job of being the innovation leader in the Internet of Things domain. And so his goal was to find $1 billion business. And the one thing he couldn't do was come up with a printer or a computer or anything like that. And so he had a lot of like areas, Internet of Things is very ambiguous, but they had several markets of interest: entertainment, education, government, retail, office, and go. And so they didn't, you don't know what's going on. So you got to start scouting the territory. You got to figure out what the big ideas are. You can see some theories of the big idea there, demonstrate them, and then deal with the handoff. So Ralph did all those things, and his results are, I think, extraordinary. He achieved a 30 times return on innovation. So he stewarded $12 million. He got a 23% success rate. One was a complete commercial success. One launched, went for a while, and eventually got bought out. So we count those two as successes. One investment proposal that was offered that was declined, and then 6 just kind of failed and created $400 million enterprise value. So I think this is a pretty good outcome. Now, how he did it is quite interesting, and it rests on a critical insight, because he started innovation is being dominated these days by either a kind of stage gate view or a lean startup view, sometimes also called agile. There's some different vocabulary different people use. So I'm going to use the lean startup vocabulary because I think it gets the big idea across. But the critical thing that Ralph did was he mashed up lean startup methods with real options methods. And just so I sort of define my terms a little bit, and without getting too much into the specifics, I'm not trying to define these. These are both very complicated, interesting topics, but just to kind of get the idea across. So if you start on the left, in lean startup, the big idea is to treat innovation as a series of learning experiments, as opposed to a series of deliveries to be made. And one of the surprising insights that comes out of that is that iterative, flexible approaches seem to work best. You should anticipate major pivots or cancels or adjustments or all kinds of craziness. And this is kind of standing in contrast for large companies to traditional stage gate management or waterfall sort of systems. Now, if you jump to the right, what's the big idea in real options? In real options, the idea is that you're paying to learn, and that learning has value because you can decide to invest more or not when uncertainty is reduced. So you can see it's quite parallel, but it takes a bit more of a financial perspective or a decision-making perspective on essentially the same issue. And the surprising insight here is that high uncertainty is high value. This is versus a general environment of like risk aversion or risk mitigation or avoidance. Now, this is be uncertainty seeking because that has the highest risk aversion. And there are deep traditions behind each of these. So one of the core ideas, if you go to the left again on the bottom, says understand your hypotheses. So what has to be true for your innovation idea to be a success? Now, I think real options adds 2 what I call upgrades, and these are maybe quibbles, but I think they're important improvements, because in a large business, you're not dealing with VCs or strict financial investors. You have executive investors who are running businesses. So what do the investors need to know to actually increase that investment? Because you're going to be competing with other investments they might actually make in their core businesses, or the CTO's office might make, and so on. And these are typically assumptions that drive the business case. So there's a bigger emphasis on the financial side in the corporate world. But I'd call that a sort of quibble or upgrade, taking lean startup over. The next thing Lean Startup says is you should prioritize based on uncertainty of the hypothesis and speed. And the idea is to make as many iterative learning cycles as possible. And this is great, particularly in areas like software where you can really run fast. So if you add the real options thinking, there are two important new ideas. So uncertainty isn't merely the objective uncertainty because there's a handoff. And so that residual organization, the handoff organization, what is their ability to deal with uncertainty? So some companies, like take a pharmaceutical company, is very, very good at dealing with clinical uncertainty. And that does not really need to be de-risked by the innovator because the core organization can handle it well. The other kind of area is speed. In a large organization, this is basically wrong because making real stuff just takes time. You have to be much more judicious. And it's the impact of learning, which I'll get into more, but basically, I mean, how much would this learning upgrade the business case? You could think of it sort of that way. So that's the core insight that Ralph had and how he was able to drive his success. Now, he learned that from his predecessor, who also at HP had the job of getting HP into smartwatches. And this is just as smartwatches, Apple Watches are taking off. HP is a great candidate. They analyze the category, great systems level engineering expertise, ability to miniaturize product. They've got some kind of smartwatches going. They indeed invented the world's first smartwatch back when it was a nerd toy. Market's growing like crazy. The category is growing. Looks like a good area for innovation and scouts. And well, okay, so you're now the leader of this innovation leader in this area. Where do you start? Well, you've got to, understand the terrain and figure out the big ideas and demonstrate them and then stick the handoffs. So they were adopting lean methods. So remember, lean says, understand your hypotheses and prioritize based. So when you think this way, this drives you to accomplishment focus. That is, what can I get done quickly? And it's a good insight. So what they did is they used a framework called Business Model Canvas, and you may use this framework or other frameworks. There are a couple of good ones, this is a good one. It's very popular these days. But they figured out what their hypotheses were by considering the Business Model Canvas and putting up issues that dealt with the elements of what this fashion watch business. The core idea was to build little puck that could go into fashion watches. So think like Fossil or Longines or any of these, so that the watches could remain fashionable but have like electronic marks in it. So it's an OEM play. So just kind of keep track of these because how these get dealt with is an important issue here. So that's the terrain. And they go to their executive investor meetings and they say, okay, is there a there, right? Is there anything here? Get a quick win, prove that the idea has traction. So they run off for their first major iteration and they produce this. It's a watch with Michael Bastian and they get great kudos for this. The reviews are HP smartwatch actually looks good and high tech meets high style in the Michael Bastian chronograph by HP. So they get Wall Street Journal press. Everybody's pretty happy, and they go back to their executives, and the question there is on the left. Prove there's a there. They were able to generate 1.2 million in revenue, sell 5,000 units with this watch, and they dealt with, can they work with the designers? What's the hardware bomb? Can you actually enhance a fashion watch with digital areas with this minimum viable product? So fabulous success. So what's next? Well, investors basically start asking, is this a business for HP? So you showed us that this is a thing, is this a business for HP? And so how do we drive global scale? Can we leverage our channel for more volume? These sorts of questions. So the team runs off their next sprint. They develop this watch with Movado. And here they integrate the app. They also show this is much higher fashion. They have a ladies watch here. This is now kind of the minimum awesome product level. So the watch is first, the mobile app, it's more fashionable. These are the innovation hypotheses that they're dealing with, and they're showing fabulous growth. They go from 1.2 million to 8.1 million and 3x the volume. So this is looking like a fabulous success story. Ask yourself though, they're certainly showing accomplishment. Are they answering, or how well are they answering the executive questions? Sort of, maybe. So the executives more or less ask versions of the same question again. And so the team goes off and says, well, we're showing this kind of hockey stick growth. One way to make this big is to have lots of brands. So let's go and deal with more brands. So they picked, working on the innovation activities, more brands, more SKUs, getting better integration of the modules, what would be called customer development in a sort of lean perspective. And you can see they've got watches with many, many brands there. So they've got tremendous successes. They continue to grow very rapidly. And it all looks good. So I'm going to put you guys in the driver's seat for a moment, and we're going to go back to this poll in a second. Put yourself in the position of the executive investor at this point. I have something that's grown from 0 to 80,000 units. It's generating 12 million in revenue. This is in the CTO office, and it's ready to hand off. The CTO doesn't have a charter to generate, to run profitable businesses. This is right on the cusp. So what do you recommend for the executive team? Or if you're on the executive team, what would you do? Your choices are stop, just gonna, you've sunk 2 million, you sell the business, you put 10 million into it to sort of tidy it up, and then you get something in return, or you operate it and get some unknown amount of future money. So I'm going to go back to the poll system here. Your texts remain active, and you should be able to just text to that number here. Hang on. I'm going to refresh this poll. You should be able to text to the number there. What would you do? All right. Now there is something fishy going on with this poll. I'm going to give you a few more moments in case it's just a kind of technical problem here. Okay, so everyone's having some moment. I'm also simultaneously trying to load this on the web controller and taking a take a look at this on my web here. I see the poll isn't activated. There we go. Okay, so go ahead and try again. Sorry, there's some glitch. The poll wasn't properly activated, so I'm going to give people another 1 minute or less to go ahead and put your numbers in the poll. And clearly there's something a little wonky with the link to PowerPoint, so we're just going to do it on the web controller. Okay, you can see lots jumping around here. A lot of you want to sell. Some of you want to operate. It's basically 60-40 sell. It's jumping around. I'm basically 60-40 say sell, and 40% say operate, and nobody says stop. Okay, so good. So let's take a look at what, oh, there we go. Okay, so that refreshed. So what they did is they canceled it. And the key lesson from this is something called the evidence of value. So here's what the executive vice president said. It's a very cool product suite. I applaud the team for everything they've done. I mean, it's awesome, right? I mean, just look at that. I'm very impressed personally. But the guy says, however, there is no evidence or proof that this business can scale to a magnitude to materially impact our business group profitability. And in particular, sort of some of the part of the backstory of this is that HP's business in building computers is you build a few SKUs and you make them 1 million times. And one of the things about this is that there are more SKUs, more products with shorter runs. And that's not in HP's wheelhouse. That's not a routine uncertainty for the business that's picking it up. And they hadn't really demonstrated how to deal with the multiplicity of SKUs on the back end. They just started generating more and sort of created a problem. So this goes to, let's debrief this now. And this is what Ralph did, is he picked up, this was his predecessor's job, and the predecessor found other things to do. And so Ralph really went back and analyzed this and tried to figure out what was going on so he could build on these lessons learned. So what is the value of evidence? So, doing innovation is like doing a puzzle, and it's a wicked puzzle like this one shown in the background. Not only is the pattern hard and some of these fish are upside down and, it doesn't really make sense, there are no corners, there are no edges, and there are even some extra pieces. So not all unknowns are of equal value, and some are just distractors. So the first thing that Ralph realized was that Lean says, look at the sort of the objective uncertainty, and add on this idea that he and I have come to call ignorance, where you need to combine the objective level of uncertainty with an organization's ability to deal with it. And so there are three categories. The first one is speculative, and the key to this is a potential for surprise is high. You may go down this road and just find yourself taking a right turn, go somewhere you just don't expect. Now, how would you know that in advance? Well, there's little basis for the assumption, more or less you're making it up, and or it's just so far beyond anything familiar to the organization that you're basically guessing. There's really no foundation for even a kind of educated guess here. Now, if you jump to the other end of this, what we're calling routine, so this could be tricky, but it's kind of doable. So a couple things in terms of the objective uncertainty, it's like estimation error or relatively small levels of uncertainty. So something like a hardware bill of materials, that's in HP's wheelhouse. They may not know exactly what it is, but they have business processes and organizations that can crank that out and fix it. Another angle here is that it's in an organization's wheelhouse, even if it's objectively large. And I think the best example, as I said before, is kind of pharmaceuticals. Their ability to handle the risk of a clinical trial is objectively a massive uncertainty, and these are the best organizations in the world at prosecuting that uncertainty. So that's routine for them. Now, in between is uncomfortable uncertainty or ignorance. So this is too much to handle. So the possibility of surprise is much less. So there's a kind of bounded range with unknown actual value. Could be market share or a market size or something like this. But it's really too big an uncertainty for the organization to deal with productively. Or maybe said another way, if you threw this to the organization, the uncertainty is so high they become dysfunctional about it. So if you take a look at go back to the SmartOrg case and look at all those issues on their business model canvas, that was their survey of the terrain. So they went back and range these things on this kind of definition. And you can see here is a bunch of issues that they really don't know anything about. So they're making stuff up. For example, the interaction with the designer, completely outside of their wheelhouse. The hardware bomb, they don't know anything about it because they've never done a watch before, but they're pretty good at that. So that's a more routine uncertainty as an example. So that was lesson one, was that you had to kind of look at uncertainty plus your ability to deal with it. The second important thing that he realized was this idea of impact. So how much will the resolution of an issue improve the business case? So they had a business case for this, but it sort of became not credible, and the evidence they were delivering was not actually improving the business case. Now, the thing is that since you're uncertain about everything, the issue is how much will learning about an uncertainty matter? So this is an output called a tornado diagram. At the top is a figure of merit, net present value for a business case. And there's a set of assumptions that is this vertical line that's about 44,000. So that's 44 million as a business case. And that's based on assumptions about the total available market and market share and selling price and all the kind of assumptions you might see in a business case. Now, the key about innovation, of course, is that you don't know enough to really make credible assumptions. So what's important is the scenarios or the factors that drive the ranges. So if you look at this total available market one, they had thought through scenarios that would lead to very high markets. So smartwatch losing a nerd stigma and becoming symbols of sophistication. This has in fact happened, largely driven by Apple. High range of watch styles and price points. So there's something for everybody. This has kind of sort of happened. A seamless transition from analog to digital. So these are the kinds of issues that make this a very big mainstream market. On the other end, reasons for low, if the market series develops a series of niche products, nothing with broad appeal, that means it's a small market, or the technology remains pricey, so it remains small because of price, Or in fact, watches could just lose importance. I mean, my kids who are in their early 20s basically don't wear watches. They get all their time off their phone. So the idea of impact is to associate those issues or that survey of the terrain with these uncertainty bars based on which are related to the factors driving the upside and the downside. Of course, you'd like to drive the upside if possible, but if it's going to be on the downside, you want to know as quickly as possible because that's the basis of a pivot. So this is the second idea, is impact as opposed to speed. And the aha is basically focus on discovery. See, if you have something that's speculative and has a big impact, we're going to call that discovery. That means that the prospect of surprise is high and it matters a lot. There are uncertainties. If you look to the lower right, we call these the navigate ones. They're big, but they're routine. So maybe the core organization can actually kind of handle that. If there's something high surprise, it's very speculative, but the impact is small, well, you may need to sort of work that out, but it's not going to make that much of a difference. And finally, the lower left, manage, that is small, and you have to, it's probably a lot of work, but it needs to be done. But it doesn't need to be done by the scout or the innovator. So the question is, how much discovery content is there an issue? So we just take a readiness score. That's just ignorance times impact. It's very simple. And the point is that the resolution of the discovery issues has the greatest influence on an executive investor's decision to proceed. Do they accept it into their organization? Do they invest in it? Do they move it forward? So that's kind of the mashup with real options part. So, Ralph did this for smartwatch. And if you look at these issues, there are only 3 here in the upper right, and maybe some tweeners. So maybe it's 6, depending on exactly where you want to draw your line, but it's not that many of them. And in particular, if you give the readiness score of each of those products and put them into a bar graph, so the total readiness for smartwatch is here, and you say, which ones are discover? Well, it's brands, SKUs, channel, module integration. This is what the investors wanted to know about. But what the innovators focused on, the accomplishment focus, the speed focus, had most of the project attention going into these issues that are in the kind of navigate kind of category, specify navigate value. So they were putting a lot of time and energy into things that weren't actually answering the executive investors' questions. And this was predictable pretty early on. So Ralph took this lesson and adjusted it. Where do you start? The previous focus was lean. Understand your hypothesis, prioritize based on uncertainty, speed. It's accomplishment focused. The mashup, real options plus lean. Understand your hypothesis, prioritize based on the value of evidence. That is, make sure what you deliver demonstrates that this is valuable, which is based on ignorance and impact, and this makes you discovery focused. So let's go back to Ralph. So Ralph had done this analysis, and he's now in charge of Internet of Things, along other innovation leaders looking at other things, and he's got this just giant pile of things to go consider. So, well, what does he do? Now, he knows he needs to do these things here I've expressed through metaphor, right? Understand the new terrain, figure out what the big ideas are, demonstrate them, and stick the handoff. So what he did was he kind of operationalized these basic ideas, and he put them into a kind of incubation process that put the insights of ignorance and impact into practice. So he had folks do formal issue scanning, making sure they had a broad view of all the stuff, basically unifying the desperate. He found that took, people have different opinions or conflicts and so on, then that all got on the board early. Then he made everyone go through the evidence of value. That's the tornado diagram. So then he had clear understanding of what financial outcomes or what innovation outcomes made the financial picture big or drove the business case. So he used that to make the ideas big and get the executive investors interested. If we could drive this upside, wouldn't that be great? Then he focused his experiments on discovery, the value of evidence part, and that helped convince the skeptics because he was really focusing on the questions that they had. And finally, in order to stick the landing and demonstrate the path, you have to bundle that into actual projects and reviews that make you accountable for discovery and make pivoting or scaling up or canceling or whatever you're going to do into a kind of practice where those executives can see what's happening and see what they need to do next and kind of get that organizational handshake going. Now, in this, he embedded 3 simple measures of innovation. So the first one is a summary of the tornado diagram. So this is the enterprise value as a potential. So you can see entertainment has a wide range of uncertainty. Education, well, they're all wide range of uncertainty. Some are narrow, some are wide. Entertainment has a lot of upside, and so on. So he has a clear range of business cases that he's working within. He's making a request for scouting resources. So entertainment takes a lot to investigate, government takes less, retail takes a little less. So this is the project management request for innovation. And then he has opportunity readiness. So he's done his hypotheses and he's figured them out and he's scored them. And he's communicating how much discovery content there is. So you can see like entertainment and retail have a lot of discovery content. Education, not so much. As one of the side things he does is negotiate with his executive investors where they would draw a line. When would they be ready to have the handoff? So that's part of this discussion through this kind of dashboard. But these are the 3 simple measures. What's the range of enterprise values? What is my ask for scouting resources? And what is my readiness? Which projects am I going after? So he sets all this up, deals with his executive investors, and then he goes and he runs his experiments. He does this work. So design sprints, actual customer interviews. What he finds is, how do you win in Internet of Things? Well, first of all, you have to realize this is scouting. So he's trying to build good investment grade proposals. And the fact is, some of them aren't worthy of it. So education gets a narrower value. So he's accomplished this. Little white is what he's dealt with and bought down, that kind of readiness. So it's getting more ready, but unfortunately it's getting a little worse, as is retail and as is office. So, okay, so that's a fair outcome for innovation. He also finds some things are getting better. So entertainment, they bought down half the discovery and it looks like there's more upside. Similarly with government, they didn't buy down quite so much, but that's actually looking more positive. And then remember, he's focused on discovery, and discovery is the highest potential for surprise that matters. That's kind of how it's defined. And so precisely because he's focused on discovery in entertainment, he and his team are in a position to have a new surprising insight. And so in particular, what he realized in entertainment, he was looking at VR headsets and trying to make high-end VR headsets. And he's looking at demos and doing customer assessments. And he realizes, or he and his team realized, that all of the headsets are tethered to a very awkward boom over to computers on the side. And that one of the jobs to be done is mobility. It's not fidelity, it's mobility. And so they come up with this idea of a VR backpack. And they go to the hardware store and they buy batteries and they put a laptop in a backpack and connect the headset and do some initial demos. And wow, this business just, they've taken out all the discovery. It's close to what HP normally does. So it's got the discovery content's pretty good. They don't, none of the business gets nailed, but they do know what kind of range it is. And this is the success, and it's precisely because he's focusing on discovery instead of accomplishment that this pops out. And so that led to a fabulous success that has since grown to a $2 billion revenue for HP, well, at least last I checked. And if you look at his results from this process, that is the commercial success. That is just a fabulous commercial success. The launch and buyout was in the government. It was a when a policeman draws his gun, the body camera automatically comes on. So, and it's a whole system to do that. They developed that business, they grew it for a while, and then they realized they didn't really have the channel or kind of product understanding. So they made a deal with a company that provides police gear that was more amenable and would better be able to prosecute the opportunity. But that was counted as an innovation win. They made quite a bit of money off it. They got that going. They made one investment proposal, I forget which it was, and the business said, that's a great idea, it's a good proposal, and we're just going to pass. So that was a fail in a way, even though I think that's a scouting success to make a good proposal. We're going to count it as a failure here. And then 6 opportunities, they said, you were very excited about that retail idea, and there just isn't a business there for HP. So fabulous kind of results, I think. So I'd like you to reflect for a moment on your innovation results. And where are you on a scale of extremely satisfied to extremely dissatisfied? How is your return innovation going? So go ahead and send your text. There's still folks coming in. So we have 40% moderately satisfied. Let's just call it 40% are moderately satisfied and 60% are dissatisfied to some degree. Just to kind of keep it simple, you can all see the graph. It's interesting, nobody's neutral and nobody's very satisfied, right? So this is an area of improvement. We are all seekers, I think, in this area. And I've offered my kind of contribution to maybe one way to move this thing forward. As I say, I am a life learner in this, and I am still pursuing this question from Xerox PARC. So SmartOrg, my company, has done this approach, we're calling it Innovation Navigator, many, many times as sort of workshops, this mashup of real options and lean startup for companies like DuPont and Rogers. And we found it helps demonstrate financial credibility, foster critical thinking, overcome skepticism, and ultimately increase innovation acceptance. And with COVID, a lot of our workshops got shut down, of course, because that wasn't happening very much. And so we have turned to software and are developing software for this, which is now underway in alpha trials, being tested by a number of companies. And I'm very eager to get your input and feedback on this, and perhaps you're even interested in it. So if you are interested in the software, you can check out that webpage if you prefer to type it, or you can use that QR code to get over there quickly, either now or later, learn a little bit more about the software, and I'd be happy to share a demo if you are so inclined. So that's part of my contribution to this problem and to this community, and well, that's the invitation.
Hey,
so,
David. Hey,
yes.
David, this is Gary. Are you checking the chat box? I see one question.
Yes. Yes. That's a perfect nudge. So this is the kind of conclusion, and now it's Q&A time. And in the chat box, there are some questions there. So go ahead and fire in some questions. We've got about 10 minutes for that, and we'll start to take the questions. So the first question is, how do you deal with a high impact discovery, high impact unknown that does not so cleanly translate into a financial model variable, e.g. user engagement? So it kind of depends, and that's from Noel. Thank you, Noel. So I think it depends on what you mean by user engagement. So if you want to clarify as I sort of answer what I think you mean. First of all, user engagement might very well translate into a financial variable. You have to go back to what are the reasons to believe that, say, total available market would be large, or perhaps your market share would be large. And if you've got a product, let me just pick market share as maybe a simpler example. If you've got a product with low user engagement, if you've got a hypothesis with low user engagement, you are not going to get a good market share. So that's kind of a way of looking at it. And I have found that if you can construct the right sort of template, what are the questions you're asking, then you can get those much better connected to the actual issues in innovation, whether they're around user experiences and the market, or whether they're around financial issues or whatever. That tornado diagram is a different approach to business case thinking. It has a name called parametric modeling, which is, a $10 nerd word. But basically what it means is most business cases are done as a kind of wall of numbers. I'm sure you've all seen this sort of finance thing where, show me your finances for the next 10 years. And I've got 16 line items, including things like working capital, on something haven't even invented, and show me how it's going to play out over many years. And then I'm going to do a financial analysis of that and decide on your project, right? This is very counterproductive, I think. And it's just, you asking somebody to make hundreds of estimates on stuff they don't know very much about. So I think this is a very counterproductive way of thinking about financial impact in the context of innovation. So this parametric model, on the other hand, sort of jumps into the future and says, let's suppose your project gets off the ground. And let's go out to where, you've reached some sort of new market equilibrium with it. And now let's say, what are the factors that are going to make this parameter high or low? And this is the key, is the qualitative scenario thinking about what drives this up and down. So user engagement in our prototypes would lead us to believe to higher market share. It might be other issues too. Channel, for example, better channels or deals with partners. And if you've sort of got a good parametric model, these parameters will force the right innovation critical thinking while simultaneously giving you some basis for quantifying the impact. And that's how you kind of close the loop between the finance and the innovation direction. The financial outcome isn't a promise. It's not a wall of numbers promise. It's a tool to put critical thinking about financial issues into the context of innovation, and then guide you to the things that have the highest uncertainty, that are most going to convince the investors to proceed. So hopefully that answers the question, Noel. Let's see, here's so Noel actually has responded to my answer. He says, it sounds like high user engagement gives you more confidence in your volume projection. That's essentially, I gave a long, complicated answer, and that's essentially the question. That's essentially the answer. So that's a better summary. Thank you, Noel. And please, more questions. So Pat asks, how would you vary this concept with looking at operational innovation versus product innovation? And so, again, I'm not quite sure of your terms exactly, so I'm going to guess. And Pat, if I don't get it right or you want to clarify, please throw it into the chat and I'll try to respond. I'm going to think of operational innovation as meaning stuff like cost reduction. So improving the plant, or possibly even what you might call refresh or churn kind of innovation. Next year Pepsi needs a new color or something like that. So those are areas that, innovation's a funny word. The kind of innovation I'm talking about here is driving new growth through something new and unfamiliar. So you might loosely call this scouting. So what I'm talking about here tends to have high speculative content. And so these churn, the new color, the brand refresh, to the extent that they have speculative content, this would be a perfect fit. To the extent that they don't, then that's more incremental innovation. And some of these elements are helpful. I have found tornado diagrams to be quite insightful, no matter whether it's incremental or more dramatic innovation. But the idea of ignorance and impact is much less important, because in these kind of more operational, incremental sort of innovations, there really isn't any speculative content. The uncomfortable things may be relatively few, if any, and you're all down in that kind of more, either you need to manage it or navigate it kind of uncertainty, typically speaking. I would also add that there is a portfolio question sort of sitting on top of this, which is how much should you be putting into these more kind of speculative investments, or these highly risky ones where you don't know which way it's going to go, versus how much you should put into more incremental or traditional innovation. And that's, I think, a very important, closely related topic, but I would call that a different topic. So, Pat, I hope that gets your question. Please feel free to drop into the chat if you want to have me clarify. What other questions do people have? All right. I guess that's, I don't see any more questions. So Gary, should we call it or give people another moment?
See if anybody else has any questions. Give it a minute. If not, I think it was we have a question.
How many organizations are using this software today? So this is from Alex. Thank you so much for asking that. We're doing the current cohort of alpha trials is 6 organizations. And they range, I think, let's see, DuPont is in it, ExxonMobil's in it, HM Claus, that's a big agricultural company, but their brand isn't well known. Carnegie Mellon is participating, as is the University of Iowa. There's a foam company whose name I forget, sadly. Hopefully they don't call me on that. So, it's a handful of companies that have done this method through sort of more workshop elements, is a larger number. And as I say, we do these workshops in a kind of more training mode and a more get stuff done mode. And then the software is essentially the number one request from these kind of workshops was, can you give us tools to do this ourselves and make this more scalable? So then we've been working on that software. Hopefully that answers the question. Thank you, Alex, for asking that. Anything else?
Okay, you're getting some accolades. Great presentation. I agree with Noel. This has been a fantastic presentation. And again, as a reminder, it has been recorded and it will be archived. And if anyone needs to follow up with David, his email address is on the screen. And of course, you can reach out to me as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
More comments on the presentation. I think that's going to be a wrap. David, I want to thank you tremendously for your time, and I'll follow up with you accordingly. And I want to thank all the attendees for their time, and hopefully this was a value proposition that is, in my opinion, very typical of IRI. And again, thank you for your time, and look for more of this in the future. So We'll sign off for now.
Thank you for inviting me.